live. And by live, I mean we're pre-recording this so we can edit it in case we make any mistakes. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Beyond the Device. I'm joined today with a fantastically intelligent person named Swalé Nunez from Iuncta. Swalé, so smart that Common Sense refers to it as Swalé Sense. And I know this because I talk to Common Sense every Wednesday. We commiserate on the what's happening in the world. But seriously, I'm very excited for you to be here. Swalé and I actually used to work together back in our days at Samsung, and I'm very excited for you to learn about what he's doing. Mainly because if you have an identity, you should really be paying attention to what we're going to be talking about today. So if you have an identity, definitely stick around and learn about what he's up to. But before we get into that, Swalé, I know you, we go back a ways, but can you introduce yourself for the folks listening or watching?
Sure. Always a pleasure to have conversations with you, Reid. They're always exciting. I always have a tough time describing myself, but I think the one I've settled on is like just a human creativity connoisseur. I'm just fascinated by human creativity. I think my creativity takes shape in the form of technology. It's not as fun as anything artsy, but it's my outlet. And I've always been big on user-centered design and building solutions that could impact like society. And that's just kind of me in a nutshell.
Okay, awesome. That brings us to Iuncta. I want to talk about that, but before we talk about what it is, I want to talk about why this is so important. And this is, you and I have talked a bunch offline, and I think this is again, I know I was being a little flippant in the beginning there about like, hey, do you have an identity? Like, you should probably be aware of what's happening in the world. But I think there's some really pretty crazy things that have been happening around our identity and how they're being managed and ultimately owned by entities that aren't, they're not us and in the digital world. And as we become more and more entrenched into the digital world, things like Meta, the Singularity Project with Elon Musk with the Neuralink, whatever that's called Neuralink, right? Not Singularity. But there's just some really interesting things that are happening in the world, but also potentially ominous things as well. And I think you, not you specifically, but you listening, watching, having power and control over your identity in this digital world is going to be so incredibly important as we get further and more entrenched in this digital world. So that being said, Swalé, can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing at Iuncta and why this is so important and why it's important right now? Because this is like kind of heading into a specific direction we should be aware of.
Yeah. So before I kind of dive into Iuncta, I want to talk about identity, online identity in particular. I think it's not a stretch to say that identity is the most valuable thing on the internet. And I think these major corporations, these service providers, these social media platforms understand that, and they've done a great job of profiting from it, right? Creating a marketplace for identity. And a lot of their content is user generated, and by user I mean you and I and everybody else who log into these social platforms, right? And what they do massive data collection, and with that massive data collection, they kind of understand our habits and idiosyncrasies and the things that we like, and then they bait us into buying things and advertising, right? So it's I don't want to call it ethical. It's the furthest from it, but it is happening. And because it's unregulated, they're creating a monopoly, right? So for us over here at Iuncta, our primary goal is to help our users find value in their identity. And a lot of that is building educational content that says, hey, one, you have an online identity, two, it's valuable, and three, we're creating ways for you to find value in that. And the most obvious way is how we access platforms on the internet, right? How we access our social media accounts, how we access our banking information. And that exchange, when you take control over managing your interaction with these applications, that comes with some value. And a lot of the times that value has an actual dollar amount associated with it, right? And we can kind of get into the details of that. But in the simplest form, I would say Iuncta is user-controlled social login, right? So imagine that onboarding process right before either creating an account and then putting your profile information. We simplify that by giving you control of the authentication. So you don't have to create multiple different accounts. You can use a central account, and that's how you access the internet. And then access to your profile data. And I say that We are a lot more ethical than a lot of our competitors because we're transparent in how your data is being accessed, and you control who it gets shared with. What?
Imagine that
Yeah.
transparency. What a novel idea. You were like over, not to go down the political rabbit hole here, but like over COVID and COVID passports and whatnot. It's like, oh, I don't want that on my phone. It's like, well, why not? Like, it's like, what's the problem with transparency? In the same way, it's like to the big tech companies, like, hey, why can't we have a little transparency about how you're using my identity to make a boatload of money? Like tons and tons and tons of cash. And like to your point about the predatory or the way that the people are advertised, I would compare it to like the predatory lending of the 2008 housing crash, where people were, you remember the McMansion stories where you put $1 down, you get $1 million home. Like what could possibly go wrong there? Like it's a very similar. It's like people they're and you've talked about this with me before with like psychographics and the ways that people are manipulated into buying things because they prey on our insecurities. And it's like, oh, you're not good enough because you're not flying in a private jet and you don't own an exotic car. And so if only you had these other material possessions, then you would be a happy person. And it's really jacked up. And again, it's like they know all of our likes and dislikes because we post and we talk about them on these social media platforms. And that stuff is all aggregated and owned by something that's not you, which is crazy. Really, really crazy. So what you're doing is unbelievably important.
No, and it's there's a bunch of secrecy associated with it because to them your identity is priority is proprietary information, right? And they take advantage of that. And I say
And
this.
how sorry, how crazy is that though? It's like it's like your identity to me is that's proprietary information. It's
Correct.
like that's my identity. That's what you're talking about. No, it's mine. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about what we're doing. It's mine.
And there's this famous documentary around the idea of this individual, especially around Cambridge Analytica, trying to figure out, hey, what identity information do you have of me, and are you willing to share that back to me, right? But I think going to the point that you mentioned earlier, one of the sound bites that usually gets pulled from every time I get an opportunity to speak is this idea that the greatest act of deception in this social digital world is them convincing us that our priority is popularity when their priority has always remained profit, right? So they're trying to make as much money as they possibly can, and they have us believe that that our value is centered around likes, views, and how people gravitate towards us in this uber hyper social world.
Yeah, it's really there's actually a comic I'm blanking his name or blanking on his name, but he has a great bit about the internet and like whether or not, and it's like in 10 years from now or 20 years from now, do you think we'll look back at the internet like it was cigarettes? Like you let a child use the internet, you let a pregnant woman use the internet. It's a great bit, and I'm not doing it any justice, but I think it's a very much in line with that, where it's like there's and actually to that point, have you ever seen Tristan Harris's Social Dilemma? It's a great documentary which outlines a lot of these things. Correct. And one of the most notable parts of that film, actually, spoiler alert, is right at the very end. And I wish the film opened with the end instead of the way it opened, because they're like, hey, like you're a person that designs this stuff. Do you use any of this? And it's like, no. Do your kids? Nope. I don't let my kids use any of this stuff. It's like, that's that's like insanely telling that this is probably, there's some nefarious stuff behind the scenes that we really need to be aware of.
And we do have to be mindful of that, because you mentioned earlier, so what's happening is transitioning into Web3, right? And the idea of the metaverse is becoming more and more of a thing. It's more than just a buzzword. Like companies are putting together a resource and infrastructure to support this transition. But the scary part, for lack of a better word, is about this idea of it being more immersive. So what that means is they're trying to create versions of your identity. There's even coined a term called metahumans, where there's a version of you that understands your likes and your dislikes and things that you'd gravitate to, and they start making that decision for you, right? So and it's scary because now we still have to consent, but at some point in the future we wouldn't have to, because our metahuman is going to consent on our behalf. So rather than trying to decide whether or not you should buy it, it'll just start appearing at your doorstep, because your metahuman was so smart enough to make that decision for you. And that's why it's important, right? Because again, if we don't take control of our identity now, we're at a point where, as we go further into Web3 and as technology advances, then it's going to be more difficult for us to kind of assume that control, right? And like I said, as we talked about before, it's proprietary information for these major companies. They're not going to give it back to you, and that's the concern.
Yeah, and there's also another piece of this, like from a philosophical perspective. There's so much more to life than just buying crap. Please be. It's like I think probably a lot of people are aware of that, but just there's a lot to life outside of just consuming random stuff that you don't really need, and that like this is it's weird if you kind of play that chess game out. It's like where does that end? Where it's like at what point are we just like a facilitation of little tiny ATMs for larger companies? That seems like a strange. That doesn't seem like that's ending well. Where it's just like we're kind of like erasing all of the uniqueness of people, and we're just kind of replacing it with stuff.
Yeah, and I think a huge part of that is the psychology and that these major corporations are playing. Right, they're manipulating the way we think. Especially we live in a. I don't think humans were meant to exist in this hyper social, hyper accessible world, right? So
hyper connected, it's like I don't think we can't process. That was actually another brilliant thing from Tristan Harris, the way he described. He said we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike power and technology, and that's like a recipe for certain disaster. I don't mean to make this podcast sound like doom and gloom. I promise there's a silver lining to this, but I think it's also really important to highlight some of like how like potentially tragic this could be if we don't start talking about it more.
And another thing too is I think we have to understand that the value in our identity, and I say that because it is valuable. So like if you think about the metaverse, right, and the idea of this immersive virtual world. In reality, if we don't walk into that metaverse, it's just a barren wasteland, right? So none of this is possible. Or none of these kind of, for lack of a better word, crazy ideas, they can't come to fruition unless we decide to give up our identity so they can have it and make use of it, right? And I want us to understand that. It's like there's value in our identity. They know that. And it's on us to decide. And I think as a collective, so people generally ask me, how did I get the name or why the company is named Iuncta? So Iuncta is Latin for the word connected. And the internet is, there's only one internet, but it's extremely siloed, right? So in our identity is disjointed. Like the identity we have on one platform is a completely different identity than the next, and there's no interoperability, right? And I think what we're hoping to do is if we give the users back control of their identity, they can control how that identity looks on every single platform, so they're connected to each one of it. And I think as a collective, which kind of emphasizes this idea of collection, I think as a collective, if we come together as individual users and say, hey, I want back control of my identity. I don't trust your data practices. I don't think it's transparent. I think you open me up to vulnerability, and beyond that, you've commoditized my identity, right? And you're making all this money, and none of that money comes back to me, the individual user. And
isn't that crazy? Yeah, and also just like one more footnote on that, it's like you're taking advantage of me. Like that really pisses me off,
sure.
And like I see it, like I see it in my own behavior, because I'll like look, like when we were doing a remodel on my place, and it's like trying to look for certain things, and then all of a sudden you're getting blasted with ads for like pendant lights or whatever, because I was looking at pendant lights, and then all of a sudden I go down a rabbit hole of pendant lights, and I'm like, stop it. You're like purposefully putting this in front of my eyeballs to get me to engage, and it works. And there's like a cognition, or to be more cognitive of what's happening. Like you have to be hyper aware. And this is the challenge. It's like we're so busy, and cell phones are so convenient and so wonderful to have in many regard, that it's just like it's very easy just in the daily distraction of life to not realize that this distraction is on purpose. It's very, very purposeful, and it's to distract you into ultimately something which is a purchase, which is, again, when I was talking about that whole happiness thing, and more of like the philosophical approach to this, and not eroding yourself for just this chasing of materialism. Because if that's the only thing, honestly, if that's the only thing that's going to make you happy, you're never going to be happy, because there's always more to buy. There's always something else to purchase. Again, not to go down like a philosophical rabbit hole here. That's not the point. But I think it's like something to be aware of how like we're being marketed to. And when I talked about the predatory lending, I really did mean that. Like this is, I think, a very predatory practice, because you're purposefully preying on a person's insecurities to get
Correct.
them to give you cash. Like
Yeah.
that's kind of gross. Not kind of, that's gross.
Correct, and there's a science to it, right? And that you brought up the word, a word that I use in a lot of the times when I speak to is psychographics, right? And they kind of track and monitor our behavioral patterns and things that we're interested in. I've heard people describe that term as a war tool too, right? Because it's so influential and impactful in the sense that it can have a negative impact and affect massive amount of people. And that's one of the things. Going back to just our platform. And we pride ourselves on our ethical practices because right now with our competitors, right? And just for those who don't know, a social login is kind of what you see whenever you're either creating an account or logging into something. They give you the option to either log in with Facebook or log in with Google because you have existing accounts with them, right?
You just click that button
But
and you just
then
bypass it, right?
exactly right, and then they share your profile data. Unfortunately, you don't have a good idea of what's being shared, right? And beyond that, this is your social network, right? So there's things on there that like if I'm opening a new account for my banking information, right? I don't need my bank to know that I was at this place 2 weeks ago, or these are my friends, or these are my likes, right? That's unimportant for my bank account. But a lot of that data is being shared, right? And that's where the privacy concerns come into play because, again, I shouldn't have to relinquish that sort of information just to open an account. And I'm using bank account as an example, but any account in general. So for us, we're transparent in the data that's being shared, and nothing is being shared unless you approve it, right? So here it's the information that's being requested to create this account. Do you want to share that information? Yes, I do. No, I don't. Right. Whereas in any other these other platforms, it's you click a button and you don't know what information is being shared. Right. And again,
It's the shoulder shrug emoji. You say, it's actually, you click that and it's like, best of luck. And then that's just the end of it.
and it's scary because a lot of these service providers they offer a service, but majority of the money that they make is off user data and advertising. Right. And that's the scary part because we don't know what we're signing up for. We generally don't read the fine print, and we commit to a lot of these things, and a lot of that commitment involves relinquishing control of our identity.
Yeah, well, even if you do read the fine print, right? So like this is a thing. I was actually just having this conversation the other day with somebody. Those things are like 9,000 pages. So really, like that's like I just need to log in to purchase a pendant light for my kitchen. Like
Yeah.
I have to read through 9,000 pages of legalese. Like that's not scalable. But also, I don't have the ability to say no if I want to use the thing. So it's
Correct.
like if I want to use any of these services, it's not like, well, we have the EULA up there and you just read through it and you just
Yeah.
accept it and it's good. It's like, okay, but it's like, hey, I get it. This is your end user licensing agreement, but like I don't want to do it. So it's like, can I still? It's like, no. If you want to do this, you have to accept our terms. And I get like I still have a Note 9 Samsung phone, and it's like I get updates occasionally on that thing, and it's like I don't have a choice. I have to, and it's just like some of them security things, but I don't know what the hell else is on that phone. It's like I don't know. I have no idea. I hope it's nothing bad,
That's
but I'm not in control of that.
that's what's scary, right? To just to exist in this digital climate now, it involves you having to relinquish that control, right? And that's what we're trying to counter as much as possible, right? And it's twofold, right? So as much as we champion the user, we create a platform that is beneficial to our partners as well, right? So we help accelerate that onboarding process because we simplify authentication of the user and also data capture, right? Because everybody knows in an onboarding process, the key is to make it as personalized as possible, right? Because as users, I think we're two times or twice as engaged when we realize that this presentation is catered to me specifically, right? So there's an opportunity for both sides to benefit. But again, our approach is we're more on the ethical side. We want to give the users full control of their data. And then two, let them manage that, right? Let them decide, hey, do I want to give this data? Do I not want to give this data? And then again, authentication is a hassle, right? We're tired of managing passwords. We're trying to have to go through that process of reset and validate my identity again. And we solve that with an end-to-end authentication solution. And it's implemented in the form of a social login, which I think when compared to the others, man, it's night and day. Like I can't even, it's not even close.
Yeah. Well, and I guess, and that's another piece of that. We have a demo we're going to run through at some point for you as well. So
Yeah.
you can actually see this thing in real time. But I think you talked about like credentials. Like one of the things that jumped into my mind from a previous conversation was credential creep.
Yeah.
From it's like one of the biggest problems. I think that I think what's the biggest problem for Netflix is sleep. Wasn't that the CEO? He said it wasn't that his thing. He's just like, yeah, the biggest competition we have is sleep. Yeah. But the second, probably biggest thing that they're trying to figure out is, I don't know how Netflix is going to survive because I just like everyone already has it.
Correct.
So it's like where do you grow to now? And like, how do you continuing to make these like you're like 20 billion in the red? I don't understand how this company is solve it. But I also don't work at the company, so I don't know. There's probably something I'm unaware of. But I think from the credential creep perspective, you offer a really unique thing for businesses. So you talk a little bit about that as well, and then we can jump into a demo and show all this stuff.
Yeah. So let's use the Netflix example. And your question. Well, one of the questions that came from what you just mentioned is how will Netflix continue to make money? And I think they sat in a room and they realized a lot of their accounts is being shared because of shared passwords, right? And in their, I guess it's the natural logic is to think, well, if we cut down on that password share, that's a lot of new accounts we can create from those who were using somebody else's, right? In our platform, Iuncta, we offer a passwordless authentication where there's no password to share, because what tends to happen is Netflix allows you to have an account with multiple accounts within it, right? So they're a family plan. But what the problem lies is when that family member starts sharing with their friends or their partners, and they become exes, and then that ex is shared, and it just kind of it increased exponentially. But our implementation with a passwordless implementation, it gives the user control, because now I know whenever there's an access to my Netflix account, and I can share that. But anybody with my username and password cannot just access it, right? They need to go through me. I am the middleman. I am the gatekeeper of my account. And it gives me the opportunity to regulate that. So as is today, if somebody has your username and password, they can log into Netflix, and you might get a notification that there was a login. With our implementation, if somebody attempts to, it comes to you first and say, hey, there's an attempt. Do you want to log in? Is this you? Do you want to validate this? And if you don't, you block them, and they have zero access to your account. So it just puts you in position as a user, again, going back to this idea of owning your identity and every version of it, even in these individual accounts, to take control of your identity, right? And you be the manager, because nobody's going to protect you more than you protect yourself. And I think that's important to know, right? So the idea that you relinquish control to somebody else, you wouldn't put your life in the hands of somebody else, right? I would imagine that self-preservation is higher than kind of just relinquishing your
The only time I do that is on a plane. I don't have a choice, though. I can't be like, do you mind if I take off? Is that all right? If I land and take off? I completely agree, 100%. All right, so we're gonna cut to we're gonna jump into a demo for you guys, and let me cue that up.
Iuncta's intuitive mobile application is the user gateway into the Iuncta ecosystem and its suite of services. It is universally available and can be downloaded in the Apple App Store and Google Play Store. The mobile app allows users to easily log into or share profile data with other apps that have integrated into the platform. Once authenticated and inside the app, users now have a single access point to all their online interactions. No more hassle with managing multiple passwords or concerns with others having unauthorized access to online accounts. With passwordless authentication, there is no password to be lost, shared, or stolen. The username is the unique ID. Anyone wanting access to any app connected to the user's account needs approval. With a familiar profile layout, users can instinctively create and manage multiple profiles, all available to them on demand. Easily retrieve a profile to instantly create an account, complete the registration, or fill out an online form. With this much control, users can now decide who gets access to their profile, what data they get access to, and when they get access to it. With an account and at least one existing profile, registering with an Iuncta integration partner is as simple as entering your username into the field and clicking the Iuncta logo button. You will receive a notification to your mobile device that there is a registration request, and you can access the notification to complete the request. If the request is unrecognized and needs to be rejected, you can do so with a single button press and the denial response is sent back. If it is a registration request that you initiated, you can choose from your available profiles to decide which profile to use to complete the registration process. A completed registration in an instant. Following registration, future logins require even less effort. After you enter your username and click the Iuncta logo button, you'll receive a notification to your device that there is a login attempt, and you can respond by approving or denying access with a single button press. No password, no hassle. If you're okay with sharing an online account and decide you want to give access to someone else without having to manually approve, you're able to do so by generating a temporary unique key that is associated with your account. The unique key is time-sensitive and gives the other person a single successful access authorization to your online account. Once the generated key is used successfully or the time has elapsed, the key is no longer valid. Any future attempts will be blocked automatically. Iuncta's end-to-end authentication solution is user-controlled identity provisioning made simple. The Iuncta mobile app is user authentication and identity on demand, and it facilitates effortless digital interactions. Iuncta, value your identity.
All right, so that's the demo, and that's basically everything in a nutshell, but not completely, because there's a partner side of this as well. That's just for the end user.
Yeah, what the demo did was showcase the functionality from the user perspective. So the app, from a mobile standpoint, exists in the Apple App Store and then the Google Play Store, right? And it's an intuitive mobile app that gives users the ability to manage their online profiles. So, like for example, myself, I have a business profile and I have a personal profile, and they contain different information, right? So whenever I'm accessing applications or I'm doing anything online, I get to decide which profile I want to be represented by, and so it allows for sharing of data, but beyond that, it also authenticates, right? So I'm able to.
So you're sorry not to interrupt, but you actually segregate that out between like the actual consumer versus business. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. So it's like
Okay.
it's like having like in it, it's a carousel of you can create as many profiles as you like, depending on again your online usage. But my business, whenever I'm doing business and I'm here as the founder of Iuncta, my payments and my address is different. My office address, my payment information is different. And personally, when I'm on my social media accounts or anything, or online purchases, I use my personal account for that. And again, it has different information. So it's just the ability to kind of manage those and have them on demand, right? So whenever I need to fill out a checkout or onboard or create a profile or an account, I can do so with the click of a button when you utilize our social login platform.
Yeah, I mean, imagine creating something that's user-centric.
Exactly.
What a crazy idea. Well, and actually to that point, I think you have a very intelligently designed platform, because you're creating a way to manage identity now in this world, where I think a lot of other companies that are trying to figure this out are maybe they're hitting a patchwork of tech that's been around for a minute, so they're like kind of building. You ever been in New York, and it's just like the streets just paved, and then again and again and again, and just like it's all jacked up. I live in Chicago. We have very similar crappy roads here. Shout out to the mayor. But I kidding. But I think that's kind of that same that analogy where it's like you're building over a foundation that isn't great, where you just need to like strip it back and just start from scratch. And I think, because you've done this from scratch in the modern day world now, you're like light years ahead of where most of the other people are trying to figure this out.
No, we appreciate it, and that's intentional too. Because earlier in the when I was introducing myself, I kind of hinted at the idea that I'm focused on human-centered design and a design approach that focuses on how humans interact with applications, right? It's not, we don't lead off with business first. We don't lead off with money first. We lead off with experience, right? What is a human experience? What do I want my interactions to be like? And that's why even when you download the app and then when you create individual profiles, the profiles look similar to the profiles that you'd have on other applications. So it's still intuitive and you're still able to kind of move around the application. It's simple enough for you to access different profiles, and then that authentication flow, it's end to end, but it's intuitive and it's a natural response. Even logging in, it's a button. Do you want to log in or you don't, right? So either approve or deny. And we keep it as simple, as intuitive as possible because, again, it's for a good experience. We want the users to have a good experience. And in doing so, still trust that their data is being secured and it's not being shared maliciously.
Yeah, imagine that. Again, it's like user-centric design, and I'm just like, I'm not trying to screw you every 2 seconds. Like, what a bizarre business model that you just assumed would be adopted by a lot of companies. But I get it. Everyone's got quarter-over-quarter profits they got to make, and shareholders they have to be, beholden to. And so I think it's unfortunate, but we've found ourselves probably into some very unnecessarily nefarious business practices because people are trying to squeeze profit out in ways that might not be the most honest. Like I was saying, taking advantage of people's insecurities to get them to buy something. It's just like I said, it's a weird business model. Where can we find more information about this? Like what's a good call to action here? How do we get people involved? How do we spread the word about this outside of doing more stuff like this with you? But it's like what's the next step? How do people find you? How do they reach out to you?
Yeah, so our website is iuncta.io, so iuncta.io, and for our partners or integration partners, you can create an account, and then we have documentation on how to integrate the Iuncta platform into yours. It's set up to be kind of plug and play, and you get the end-to-end solution. And then for our users, the mobile app, as I mentioned, is available on the iOS and Google Play stores, respectively. So download the app, and again, we always say it's like, we have to make a collective effort, right? This has to be something that we want to do as a collective because there's strength in numbers, and this is kind of us showcasing that, and it's important because again, how identity is being taken advantage of now compared to what it could possibly be in this more immersive internet. It's a scary thought, man, and we continue to advocate for self-sovereign identity and users to have full control of their identity, and it's an ongoing process, but it's a fight that we've decided to take on, and I myself, I'm committed to it, right? So I'll continue to advocate for that. I don't know if you want my personal.
Well, they can find you on LinkedIn, right?
Yeah,
so I mean,
yeah.
we don't have to give you a personal,
Exactly.
call them at home. That's not.
Exactly. Here's my address.
Right now. So you can find you on LinkedIn. It's Swalé Nunez, N-U-N-E. How do you spell it?
Well, no, it's just Swalé with the
that's
accent
right.
already. It's just
Swalé. You went to one name. That's how badass you are. You're like Sting or Bono or something cool.
Exactly.
So all right. So just Swalé on LinkedIn.
On LinkedIn, correct. And okay. I'm there, and I think every time I talk, I kind of say this. It's like I respond to emails. I respond to messages on LinkedIn. Reid might not. I don't know if you guys how often you guys interact with Reid.
Okay, of course I do. Come on.
But no. If wherever you see me online, reach out to me. I'm always like I said. I'm an advocate for online identity and just users having control of their identity. And I'm always open to have the conversation. You and I, Reid, we've talked about this way too many times. But every time we get on the phone, it's like an hour-long conversation around identity. And I enjoy it, man, because, again, I've committed my life to this. And Iuncta is its manifestation, right? So it's just kind of continue to push forward.
Awesome. Well, again, if you have an identity, which is everybody, if you're online, which is basically everybody, please do, it's like, Just take a couple seconds to like learn this stuff and just make yourself a little bit more aware of some of the practices, and be more cognitive when you're online, you're looking at stuff, you're on social media and you find yourself down a rabbit hole of buying something. Just like, again, just take a sec and just really start to be aware of how this practice is being applied, because I don't think until there's legislation to stop it that these predatory practices are going to stop. And I to your point of like what you're working on, like I really don't like people getting taken advantage of. It bothers me a great deal. So like I said, if more we can speak out about this and the more transparency there is around how identity is managed throughout the world, I think the better we're going to be, especially as we're heading into like a fully immersive digital world with Web3. That being said, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, if you want to reach out to us directly, you can do that. You can hit us up at sales at the number 3, EYETECH.com. It's sales at 3itech.com. Be sure to be sure to click like and subscribe. Leave us a comment in the comment section. We do read those things. And if you want to post some stuff about this episode or other things you want to see, or maybe another thing we can cover with Swalé, we'd love to hear from you guys. Thanks so much for tuning in, regardless if you listen on Apple Podcast or Spotify, or if you're doing this on YouTube. We do appreciate the likes and the views. Thanks so much, and we'll see you guys on the internet. Cheers.